philosophy I have when shooting street photography is to keep everything as simple as possible. So that means keeping ISO high enough and keeping my aperture at a certain value and only changing my shutter speed. That for me has been the easiest way to shoot in street photography because everything is moving so quickly. The only time you have to change setting is really just one setting. So depending on what you want to do, you can just pick one value to change. Shooting at P mode on your camera is pretty good, but I personally like to keep my ISO and my aperture at a certain level, and all I do is adjust my shutter speed because shutter speed controls how still your subject looks. And if I want to do long exposure, it's also pretty easy to just push it all the way through and then cut down your aperture and then you're done. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with shooting in high ISO. I personally enjoy it just because how much flexibility I can get. Like if I start at ISO 1600, I can bump my shutter speed up to 2000 and get a well-exposed image. The other thing about street photography is lighting is not constant at all. Some days, if you're lucky, you get really bright, clear sky, harsh light. And that's perfect for street photography, I think, anyway, because it gives you such stark contrast between your shadow and your highlights. Often, if you want to expose for your highlights, your shadows will be crushed to nearly black. And I think it's a very great way to increase contrast in your shots. So having harsh light for me really is the dream. Subjects moved around and the clouds move in and out all the time, changing how the light looks. And I think all this variety makes street photography more interesting than it is, because you never know what you're gonna get. Like 1 minute is gonna have bright, harsh sunlight, and the moment the person walks past the light, he's in complete shadow darkness, and you might be able to catch like a glimpse of the subject, which I think makes for a pretty good photograph. Other times it gets gloomy and it changes the way you shoot. You might be playing with different things like slow shutter to make it more interesting, to insinuate movement. Or you're looking for subjects that are more interesting, like pops of color or things that you normally wouldn't notice because you're relying so much on how good the lighting looks. It's quite a challenge to shoot in bad lighting for street photography, but I think it really trains how the eye see things. It shifts gear from chasing the light to what's interesting. And I think that it's a really important concept to have in photography in general. The best part about harsh lighting is that it reveals shape so much. People always say to look for light, but I think the more accurate description would be to look where the shadow is. And it's only an interesting picture when you have both, because in order to see shape, you would need shadow. And I think it's a very interesting way to approach photography, because people always say, oh, go for the good lighting, this, that, but many people forget that lighting illuminates something, but it also creates shadow, which makes it interesting. One of the biggest things that I think about when I'm doing street photography is composition, and that begs the question, do you use a zoom lens or a prime lens? I think there are different approaches you can take when you're using one or the other, but I personally love using prime lenses just because it restricts me on what kind of shots I can take. It forces me to go closer to the action or further away just to get that vision that I want. I think it also makes you more intentional with the way you shoot when you're shooting with a prime lens. You're restricted, but that's what breeds creativity. Street photography, to me, feels like the perfect place to learn how to compose your shots, because you get to see a different perspective of the same object you pass by every day. For instance, this shot that I've got, I always pass by this place when I'm heading to the city, but I've never seen this 3 statues in this angle before. And I find it quite interesting how a camera can change the way I look at things. Some might call it tunnel vision, but I just call it getting a fresh perspective on the same things. You get really creative with different angles, like how you usually just see one thing at eye level, but when you're holding a camera, it just encourages you to explore different angles. Like, it's more flattering for people to look right on at eye level, but really interesting shots can come up when you are using different angles. For example, going wide and take a top-down shot of someone, or going really low to just insinuate how grand or how powerful this person is in the frame. And don't forget that after you take the picture, you can crop it, because cropping does make a big difference in your composition. Like, don't sleep on cropping. My personal philosophy about street photography is having the option of cropping is really important. It brings a different perspective into what you're looking at. You might get a completely different shot from just cropping in. Composition really tells a story when you are intentional with it.